We are recording.
Okay, thank you. Well, welcome everyone, everyone coming in here to a Birds of a Feather session here at PEARC21. Hopefully everyone is having a good conference so far. And this session's going to be about assessing and communicating cyber infrastructure readiness at EPSCoR eligible and under-resourced institutions. I find there's a lot of commonalities between these kinds of institutions. And so we thought a Birds of a Feather session would be useful for everyone. And so what we're going to do is we've got Zoom chat. If you're in the Zoom, please feel free to post questions and comments in the Zoom chat. We'll also keep an eye on the pathables as we go. We're going to do a brief, probably 10 to 15 minute overview slide presentation here to just get everybody on the same page in terms of what we're talking about in the session. And then we'll go to community discussion and start addressing some of the comments and questions that come in on the chat windows. So I'm Scotty Strachan. I'm from the University of Nevada, Reno, and I have several co-hosts on the line here. Benice Baird from Montana State, Gwen Jacobs from University of Hawaii, Patrick Schmitz from Semper Cogito, and Dana Bronson from Internet2. We have a number of collaborators and co-conspirators on this particular project, so you'll probably see those names as we go as well. So if you direct your attention to the slide deck, what we have here are unique challenges and trajectories for EPSCoR eligible and under-resourced institutions and jurisdictions, EPSCoR jurisdictions, if you're familiar with that funding program. These challenges and trajectories in cyber infrastructure have more to do with the fact that many of these institutions do not have well-established research computing and data approaches and strategies. And so this team, and in conjunction with the CARC organization, are working on an EPSCoR workshop that we were awarded to do next year, early next year, as part of the national NSF-EPSCoR meeting. And that award number is on the slide. We're specifically tasked ourselves in this workshop to support the research computing and data capabilities model engagement for EPSCoR institutions, but it applies obviously to a lot of other institutional types as well. So hopefully this information will be useful. So the agenda has 4 main talking points that we want to be thinking about as we go along. You can read those on the slide deck. And we'll address, hopefully the community discussion can stay on track amongst those 4 talking points when we get there. So keep an eye on the chat for the sign-in doc, and we'll go ahead and get started. So let's get on the same page about cyber infrastructure, first of all. We're looking at cyber infrastructure, research computing and data as an ecosystem of people, software, hardware resources, data acquisition instruments and devices, and the associated networking and cybersecurity. And so this is the view that the NSF and other funding organizations have started to take, that we're really talking about the entire technology stack between scientific observation and discovery and how those data originate and move along the way. So that's the context. When we say cyber infrastructure, research computing and data, we're talking about that entire technology ecosystem. Hopefully, everyone here has been attending some of the really cool talks about what research technology is doing and how people are assessing research technology at their bigger institutions. I've seen a few talks here already at PEARC about some of the large scale institutions that have really started to hit their stride in terms of recognizing the value that research technology has for their competitive edge and how it works for their central strategies. Basically, whether you're at a big institution or a small institution, if you have a research mission, if you have a research organization, research computing and data capability is going to be critically tied to that success. So we need to make sure that we all understand that. So now when we look at, what are the current capabilities model results for EPSCoR jurisdictions and therefore, kind of under-resourced institutions, we need to look at those first results from this last year and get an idea of what we're facing. But first of all, just in case people aren't familiar with this assessment tool, what is it? So the RCD Capabilities Model Assessment Tool is currently a first generation, about 120 question detailed survey that's designed to assess several, if you see in the screenshot, you can see several tabs in this model down here, designed to assess institutional capability in research-facing, data-facing software systems and strategy and policy facings of research technology support. You can see that the answers can be quite detailed, including types of deployments of each of these services or service types, and whether or not your service operating level is non-existent or whether it's quite mature. So this is a complex survey, and the making your heads or tails of this is to your upper administration is really important. And that's one of the things that we'd like to talk about in this community chat today. So when we think about the executive level and how they approach things like a business maturity model, they're really looking at levels of deployment for services and whether or not those services are providing value. So when we think generically about how to apply the results of this capabilities survey, we really will need to cast it in a business context of a maturity model to communicate to our executives. So who is using this model so far? So in this last year, this is the mix that Patrick has put together in his presentation earlier in the meeting. That shows the breakouts of who's taking the survey so far. We can see that about 25%, 24.2% of the respondents are EPSCoR eligible. So that would be probably many of you in the room today. And that means we're probably going to get some interesting results back to just look at EPSCoR eligibility RCD versus the rest of the country. And so this is a summary slide that says, in general, what are the capability scores for EPSCoR institutions versus the rest of the respondent population? And we can see that all across the board, we see a general lower capability in all of these categories. And in particular, for an example, we can just look at the data facing, that's that second pair of bars there. We can see that there is the largest disparity there, and that is also the place of lowest capability overall. And it shouldn't surprise anyone here who's doing institutional technology services, because data-facing services are the things that many of your researchers are asking for more of or complaining about right now. So if we drill down into that and we say, okay, in the model, we asked about these different categories of services for the data facing, how did EPSCoR institutions stack up there? Gives us additional insight into some of the challenges we're facing, particularly in the area of security or sensitive data management. We can see that very, very low capability scores in that category. Well, that's interesting information, and it gives us as a community to think about how we want to plan both the local level and the regional or national levels for EPSCoR states. What should we be doing to address some of these shortcomings? So I think it creates an opportunity to share and coordinate RCD planning and implementation. And basically, if we just list all these out, and I'm not going to read them all, we say, all right, these are all of the things that we could be doing together, sharing best practices and lessons learned, for example, to address some of these common shortcomings. Well, what kind of framework should that go back into? So we say, all right, if we map what an institutional RCD program looks like functionally on your campus, we see that it's multidimensional and it's pretty complicated. It's not as simple as we've got, two people doing HPC and they really don't touch any of these other areas. Well, maybe that's what I have at UNR, but yet I still have to engage governance, finance, program development, the engineering, of course, and the education and training. And how do I do that? And how do I make my leadership aware of all these dimensions as we move forward? And what elements of the RCD capabilities model point to different dimensions of these functional, the functional framework? So it's a lot to digest, but I did want us to think about all of this in that context. So what are some of the institutional challenges that we're facing as we engage the model, and then as we try to communicate results of the model back out to ourselves and to our leadership? So we think about institutional strategy. Is our institutional planning process really that informed, or is it just totally top down? They're not really gleaning a lot of information from the frontline workers across the institution. You want to have some idea of where the institution's head is at. They have a good understanding of technology and its role at their institution. How much cooperation is there on campus? And this is going to be a different flavor for every institution, right? Every institution is going to be a little bit different here. There's going to be competing investment needs at these emerging center institutions or low resource institutions for sure, where you might not be able to get different parts of your program off the ground because resources are so scarce. So you need to calibrate faculty expectations and leadership expectations against the potential and the reality of what you might or might not be able to do as part of a strategic build out. The administrative IT side is of course going to be a make or break. I think, you have to be able to engage enterprise IT. They have to help you succeed. And usually in our kinds of institutions, there's a lot of technical debt or expertise debt, and sometimes retention issues. So there's a lot of issues going on that have to be addressed as we move forward. So what we'd really like to do is get this discussion both, starting with this BoF, but also part of the EPSCoR workshop engagement team and our working group that we have. We'd like to get this discussion on best practices for how our institutions can engage this model and how we can use the results going forward. And if you need some reasoning as to, well, why should you assess this at all? I mean, maybe there are some of you sitting in the audience saying, well, we've got a pretty steady state shop, or we think we're in a good place. Why should we continually assess this? There are a lot of good business and best practice reasons for doing so, especially as technology changes rapidly and the competitive landscape changes rapidly. So I think you can make a good case to yourselves and to your leadership that doing a periodic assessment that is national in scope is going to be very helpful to move your research forward. So there's a cycle for how to do this. The research computing and data assessment team has seen that there's a number of steps in the cycle that you have to sort of go through in terms of getting your buy-in locally, forming your team, how to fill the survey out, and then how to analyze and communicate the results before you inject those into your strategic planning process, and then follow up, then do the whole thing again, right? I mean, that's a pretty classic planning cycle. So the RCD team and our EPSCoR working group, we're thinking about all these steps, and we want to help people as they engage the model. We really want to help people through each of these steps, and so there's a number of mechanisms that are offered with the working groups for how to do that, and you'll find out more about that very soon. How to engage? Well, you start here. You can also come to our office hours that are held for the capabilities model. You can check out the new NSF Center of Excellence that Dana and Patrick are involved in. And of course, this team right here that's doing the EPSCoR specific working group, we have our own engagement plan as we spin up to the workshop that will happen next spring. So that gets everyone hopefully on the same page in terms of where this team is at and what we're trying to do for NSF-EPSCoR jurisdictions and their institutions. And now what I'd like to do is open it up for community discussion along those points. So I'm going to leave this slide up for just a few more seconds, and I'm going to stop sharing and then we can get an idea if we have any questions to start with. Okay, stop the share. Looks like we have quite a few people, which is great. So do we have, I don't see any immediate questions in the chats. So maybe the first thing we should do is get people talking, and I'd like to find out, who is at an EPSCoR institution that has engaged this model so far. Is there anybody that would like to, step out there and let us know how that's going for them?
Me. I can.
Okay, Gwen.
Sorry. Oh, thank you. It's great to be part of this panel. And I want to encourage any of you that are in EPSCoR states to really think about joining this effort as we move forward. And this has really come out of a number of years of really thinking hard about how we make sure that EPSCoR states and jurisdictions and institutions have the cyber infrastructure support that they need to be successful. And so this whole effort really came out of just trying to figure out and do an assessment for EPSCoR jurisdictions to see where they fall within this whole capabilities model assessment. And we are collaborating closely also with Deborah Dent from Jackson State, who's leading an effort with HBCUs and minority serving institutions in her neighborhood there in the southeast. So we're really trying to get a groundswell of activity around this. I'll share just very briefly some of our experiences. So at University of Hawaii, we have a centralized computing resource, basically a centralized set of services to support cyber infrastructure for our various campuses. And we've gone through the process of filling out the assessment model. And what we found is that with respect to my team and folks that understand HPC and software and all that, we're able to fill out the assessment tool pretty easily. However, many of our colleagues at some of the other institutions in the UH system, our 2-year and certainly some of our 4-year institutions, it's a challenge to have even a single person there who's capable of answering the question. So that to me just really reinforces how much more work we have to do here at the University of Hawaii and elsewhere, just to find out, what do people know about their infrastructure? What do their faculty know about what's available to them? And how do we move the needle forward in terms of making sure that all of the faculty that are doing research have access to these resources? So our model is a little bit different from others, since we have some centralized resources and others that are distributed. But I think that the experiences that we've seen with just the challenges of filling out the assessment tool, I think is a real wake-up call. Certainly for me in my position here, and also I would hope it is for folks at other institutions as well.
Well, I'd also like to hear from the community if, we showed a couple of graphs from the results of EPSCoR eligible jurisdictions and their results in terms of lower capabilities across the board. I mean, I'd be interested to know from the larger community if that resonates with them, if they haven't taken the model survey yet, if they haven't gone through that process, are they seeing this, something similar, or was the trend a little bit different for them? Do they feel like they're stronger in one area than another, for example? See, David's made a comment. Not sure if they've taken the capabilities model at South Carolina. It's always hard to get community discussions moving in a virtual format. It'd be a lot better if we were birds of a feather on the table. Jason.
So I was hesitating because I feel like I'm a total newcomer. I don't know much about the organization at all. I'm a computer science professor from Shepherd University in West Virginia. The biggest university in our state would be West Virginia University, and they do have a high performance computing that we can access if we collaborate. But at Shepherd University, we're a 4-year undergraduate college mostly, and I'm not aware of any computing infrastructure besides the website and the learning management system. However, I got a C cyber infrastructure grant from NSF to study how to get internet too, because we don't have a fiber connection. We don't have we have a 1G connection to the internet. So our first step was to explore how do we even get connected. So I'm very excited at this conference hearing about all the resources that are available to us. And our IT department is interested in expanding, but right now they don't provide research computing services on campus. So maybe people could enlighten me. How do I, what's the next steps for me? I'm planning to apply for a bigger cyber infrastructure grant that would, and I'm trying to get the neighbor community colleges to go in with us. But you know, my IT department, I invited them to come to this conference and they didn't. How do I get more interest, and how do I get a hold of this survey? I'm not even aware of it. Thank you.
Sure. And this is, you know, I don't know if, I don't see Patrick taking his microphone off. But I mean, these kinds of questions are things that, you know, especially coming from institutions of your size and level of technology engagement, I still think that as complicated as this tool appears on the surface, that would still be valuable to have a look at. And I also feel like our working group for EPSCoR institutions, as Gwen mentioned, we're very much interested in getting that broader engagement across the parts of EPSCoR jurisdictions that are really under the radar. And we all have them, we all see them. And so, Jason, my first question would be, you know, do you know who the leaders of your state EPSCoR office and projects are in your state in West Virginia? And can you engage them very specifically on this topic? Because what this group is all about is we're trying to get more synergy between those state projects and the state offices and statewide available cyber infrastructure purposefully built to engage not just the home institution that buys and builds it, but also the satellite institutions.
Yes, good suggestion. And we are in contact with the EPSCoR folks. West Virginia has an organization called HEPC, Higher Education Planning Commission, and they coordinate EPSCoR efforts. So, and I've worked with them on 2 grants, but both were, one's an NIH and another one's an NSF grant, but they're not about computing infrastructure, they're about biology. So I'll take your suggestion and go back and ask about cyber infrastructure.
Yeah,
Hey,
and to follow.
Jason, I just going to interrupt because I know West Virginia a while back, everybody remembers Jack Smith. Yeah, well, he moved to Texas, but he still can probably give you some good advice for West Virginia. He worked in the HEPC, and so I can connect you, Jason. I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
And I'll just add that we have worked with a number of other schools that are, you know, in the kind of situation you're in, Jason, where they're just getting started. And yet, as Scotty says, the survey can appear a little daunting, but it's for many people who are putting together or looking to build a roadmap, it's a source of inspiration of things. What should I think about? And where do I want to start? So you may use it slightly differently, but I still think it's going to be valuable.
Yeah, so look for those links in the chat, and come on into this and also the capabilities model working groups office hours. Just engage us, and we'll be able to help you along there with parts of this capabilities model that will help. And when you think about those state level EPSCoR related grants, even if they're focused on a particular kind of science, very often they have mandates for capacity building that usually involve some aspect of technology infrastructure. And so they, you know, especially if the PIs are doing their job, they will welcome you to collaborate on these, and that can really be a help.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in there that, yeah, I mean, the capabilities model survey, it's going to take a while, and you're going to have to find a lot of different people to get accurate information on it, from central IT, from, and you know, we're a low end R2, put it that way. We are an R2, but we only got that status a few years ago. You know, we're not one of the premier names, you know, that anybody knows about. But, you know, turns out we had pretty good, the thing is that you take the survey and it will help, it will be soul crushing in some respects. You will find out, especially when you compare to other institutions, exactly statistically how much room there is left to improve. And it's better to have that as sort of a concrete value than just a vague suspicion. And, you know, like us, you know, when I went to the office hours and the other, you know, folks would say, okay, well, who do you have fill out various parts of these? Well, have your researcher facing staff fill out some of this. Who? So we brought in actual PIs to actually get researcher opinions on some of this stuff. That's, you know, take it as it is. The researchers may not know all the details of how good a job you might be doing, but they're also the ones that are going to have to be made happy with whatever it is you're doing and whatever you improve. But yeah, you're going to need people from central IT, whoever's managing systems. If you don't have researcher facing staff, find PIs that are computationally minded. You may have to talk to the library. You may find out the library is nowhere near ready to have these kinds of discussions. They may be, you know, son of a librarian, but it was a lot different in the 70s and 80s, and especially in K-12. They may still be in books, journals, and places for students to gather, rather than being like in the research enterprise. Get who you can, find out the data you can, and then, you know, get with the people that actually want to change something, and you'll have something you can actually focus on and hopefully fix a piece at a time. End of pep talk / something.
Thank you, Mike. That was exactly perfect. That's exactly the kind of feedback that we need for this project. And I guess I would only add that by filling out the survey, it helps you know what you don't know, as well as your faculty, know what they don't know about the infrastructure they could have. Yeah.
Yeah, anybody else like to ask questions, comment, etc. on these
I'll
issues?
just add for Jason really quick. So I'm at Sacramento State. We're not even an R anything. I think we're an M1 or 2. And for the last 3 years, I've been trying to start up the data advisory committee that I've been tasked for by our VPR. So we might get to do it this fall. But the VPR's office had an idea of what they had done at a previous institution with regard to questions. You're already ahead of the curve just by knowing that the research capabilities model exists, because I took that and I showed that to the VPR and she was like, mind blown. Oh my God, this is perfect. And then somehow that ended up at the president's office, and now somehow I'm on that radar. But just knowing that it exists and that you have the ability to ask all these questions, now you have the ability to move up that chain of having action happen on campus, regardless of where it's necessarily coming from. I just got promoted, so I'm an associate professor, but I'm in geography. So I can't get the computer science department interested. I can tangentially get IRT to at least talk to me. They know that I'm computer aware, but I can't really get anybody on board except for the VPR's office. And through the VPR's office, she's able to then stick everybody else on this advisory committee in order to get that conversation going. And that's going to have faculty on it. That's going to have libraries on it. And our library's books. We don't have any data science librarians, but just kind of moving that forward. So there is the opportunity to be able to move there. It might take you longer than you're wanting it to, but at least as long as there's some movement, just knowing that this exists already puts you so much further ahead in being able to do those negotiations and talks than without knowing that it exists.
And Anna, you said you're from Sac State, so you're not in an EPSCoR eligible state, but you are at a institution that's, if you have a VPR, then that means you have a research mission, but that also means that you're probably struggling for resources, given the status that you just described. And so it seems like it's an uphill battle for you, like it is for the EPSCoR states that we're talking about here. And your approach and your strategy to your upper administration is going to be the same. So I really encourage you to find those help your VPR, whoever your advocate is, up at the higher levels of the administration, like help them find the team members that can answer the questions in the survey enough to where you get an idea of what the scope is that maybe your institution can attack, and other areas where you just have to kind of throw it out. My question back to you is, are you looking at how you can try to access resources off campus that you'll never be able to stand up on your own, whether they're national or just in California? Are you guys looking at that at all? And does that play into the strategy when you are trying to, say, here are our gaps and opportunities?
We don't know yet. So I've been trying to collate what those resources are to then be able to present, but it's just a matter of trying to get all the voices at the table of, I only know the cohort that I came in with in the College of Science, what it is that we wanted to have. And all of us were asking, we need these kind of computing resources. And then they're like, oh yeah, I'm sure we have that. And then we got here and it's like, no, we don't. It's almost to the point of, yeah, just stick a computer in your office and run it there, which I know is sacrilege at most universities, where they're trying to centralize everything. And here it's yeah, just use your startup and get a computer. So it's, because I started 4 years ago, so this will be the start of my 5th year. They had just started in IRT a pilot project of, what if we give faculty a virtual machine on our servers, and if there's not a lot of load, you guys can have the overload. So it's very, very small baby steps. I've been working with Shadi from the UC Merced to try to see what their computing resources look like, because CSUs and UCs, we could potentially be working together, but I haven't really had much of an opportunity to engage over on that side just because of COVID and teaching. And we're a teaching focused institution, but now they're trying to do your research in your teaching, which is a funny. So there's a lot of that dichotomy there, but it's just right now we're at the stage of just trying to have a conversation. I think what our VPR is looking at is simply building out data capacity, not even so much computing resources as much as data resources of where could we potentially be able to store, how would we go about that, and then what are the computing resources that people need to be able to then engage in the research that they need in order to store all of their data. So I think she's looking at it potentially from a different perspective, but it's hard to prioritize what your needs are if you don't know what your needs are yet. You just know that they exist. And so that's why we're really looking forward to this RDC once we get to actually implement it and start having that conversation.
I would say come to the office hours for the capabilities model and start making the checklist of how to get the survey filled out and who to involve, for sure.
So Anna, I had a follow-up question that I think might resonate with a few others too, because we've heard similar stories like this before. You finally get the group together and you need to have these conversations, but maybe you don't have that person at the table that has had that experience. One thing that worked really well for me when I first moved to University of Hawaii was to bring in some of my colleagues from other places who had done this successfully and actually bring them in and have them talk to my CIO, my VPR, and others. And that, so they can demonstrate what the investment in, say, 1 or 2 additional staff, investing in, you know, some kind of infrastructure that really benefits, but having a success story coming from somewhere else, sometimes that helps. Would that be helpful to have folks maybe invite someone who's had this experience to one of your meetings where you're sitting around the table?
Probably once we actually have a meeting and know who's going to be there. It's literally been okay, we're on the provost's meeting. Okay, the provost has said that we can finally announce this to academic senate. Oh, COVID hit. Well, that's not happening now because everybody's trying to figure out logistics and everything else. And now it's okay, we're back on the list for fall, but things are still changing. So yeah, it's just been trying to even get on the radar to get that level from the provost's office, which now we have that recognition and they want to start it. It's just a matter of timing to even be able to start putting it together.
Wow. Awesome. I hear ya.
But yes, absolutely. Once that exists, and then it's finally at the stage of needing to get that buy-in, it's like, oh, okay, I know where to go. You guys, because I have your list now, to ask to be able to then help with that buy-in part.
Yeah, thanks for telling your story. I think, you know, even though you're in California, it's not on the EPSCoR radar. There's plenty of students and researchers facing the same problems. So, you know, that's why we didn't want to make this birds of a feather exclusive to just EPSCoR, because we know a lot of other people have exactly the same story. Dylan.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Dylan at the University of Wyoming. We are an EPSCoR state. And Anna, I'm a geography major, so awesome to hear another person like that. Well, one thing that I noticed on the graphs that were shown that I think really resonated with me was the huge disparity with the ability to soar sensitive data between the EPSCoR states and the ones that weren't. And I'm hearing that a lot here from what my health sciences colleges people are telling me, that what they're told to do is to store all their data on an external hard drive and lock it in a filing cabinet, and that'll be good enough. And I know that's not good. And are having a hard time getting the administration to buy into just a system to store their data. Like Mike said, everybody needs storage. It wouldn't cost a lot. Our health sciences college is pretty small, but it's just they are apprehensive at approaching those compliancy issues. And if there's anybody that has done it well, I would love to hear it.
Yeah, you know, I think as we discuss, you know, as we move our project as EPSCoR facing along, we get to the point of discussion about, okay, how can we perhaps coordinate resources or practices? When we get to that issue of data storage, it's going to be interesting because there are going to be a lot, or increasing more projects that have controlled data. And, you know, for example, I thought I saw his name. Yeah, he's here. So Henry from Oklahoma, for example, has an EPSCoR facing data archival resource that I've bought tapes for and shipped the tapes there, and we're standing up the workflows now, but you know, we're not going to be sending any controlled data that way. And so there still leaves a gap to be filled.
In fact, Scotty, just to cut in, when we did the analysis of all the results from 2020, support for secure data was the area that showed the biggest gap between EPSCoR and non-EPSCoR institutions. I mean, this is probably the biggest area of pain we saw.
Cool. Yeah, not alone.
Dylan, I wanted to follow up with you. Do you know Brent Ewers?
Yeah, I do know Brent. Brent's a good friend of mine.
Yeah, talk to Brent. He's on our list to come to the workshop. Did you sign up for our workshop?
I don't think I have.
All right. Well, we got you on our list now. But yeah, I know Brent well, and I can appreciate the challenges that you guys have there in Wyoming. But that hard drive story, that's the first time I heard that one.
Well, the good news is that our new president used to be the director at NCSA, so we have buy-in at the very highest level. So, yeah.
fantastic.
Something that, is a problem at my institution and my EPSCoR jurisdiction, and maybe in common with Dylan's and others, is that there's actually not a very keen awareness at the high levels of the institution, even like the research office, about what are the actual phases of research data or stages that research data moves through from application or acquisition, all the way to application and archival. And something that I think we could do a better job articulating specifically for these kinds of institutions that haven't gotten to that point of real awareness yet, I think would be nice to maybe use some of these survey results, for example, Patrick, to flesh out that map or that timeline, and here's the data life cycle, and here are where the gaps are, this part of the life cycle, that part of the life cycle. Because that would really help people decide how to make investments as well, because the researchers feel as pain, whether they are aware of each discrete stage or not, they still have to do it all. They're just coming up against reality and requirements now. Anybody else wish to tell their EPSCoR related story? Comment on some of the best practices.
Any of our panel members? Maybe Denise would like to tell her story as one of our co-PIs.
Well, I was just actually putting together a text to share in the chat, but I can say it here out loud. So, right now, especially hearing Dylan's story about the hard drive reminds me of the situation here in Montana, where I've heard the similar story of just take the hard drive and lock it in your filing cabinet, and that's your secure data. And when I heard that from our social scientists, I thought, there's a better way to do this. So I started talking to our Office of Research Compliance and our IRB, other social scientists, and our IT security folks to draft a secure research data policy for the institution. And so what happens here is that we have a enterprise level data security policy, but we have no corollary for our research data. And so what we're trying to put together is something that specifically focuses on the, I don't want to call them unique, but they're slightly different needs of research data versus enterprise data. And to draft that policy out so that researchers have a workable pathway forward to manage sensitive data. It's going to be a long path for us to get there because of the number of people across. We're not just working at Montana State University, but also trying to work across multiple Montana institutions. And so it will be a longer path for us, but that's currently what the path we're taking.
I'd actually be interested, in hearing a little bit more from folks in EPSCoR jurisdictions regarding coordinated RCD development at the state or the jurisdictional level across institutions, because this is something that my state has not done effectively, and we are injecting that into our next big capacity building proposal for the EPSCoR program, but we're very much starting from zero. And I kind of know, a little bit of the success story from Henry and Dana from, the Oklahoma CI build up days. But Denise, you're mentioning that it sounds like it's on the radar, but is that something that your EPSCoR program director or PIs are like really taking seriously and doing very specifically, or is it still ad hoc when it comes to their proposals, or do you know?
Well, I think I advocate for it a fair amount to put it on their radar, and I make a point of bringing up these challenges when I run into them so that everybody knows. I feel a little bit like a squeaky wheel in these situations because I often am approaching things at an admin level that there are so many other concerns on the table, right? And so this is just one of many, many things that need attention in our jurisdictions. And so it's helpful actually, having the RCDCM assessment results and using that to demonstrate, first, let's look at coverage across various disciplines and domains where natural sciences and engineering have, let's say, excellent coverage. Our social scientists have very little, and likewise with our humanities scholars. And so, using that to say, okay, so we have this problem over here where our social scientists don't have the support they need, and it's quantified. And I can use that as a jumping off point to say, and so when we're talking about matters as common as storage, and we're looking at how that is different for social scientists versus engineers and natural sciences. And then you learn that some of the natural sciences, say earth sciences, have challenges when they're taking individual well data from private lands, and there are implications there for secure and sensitive data. And oh, well, we should be doing something about that too, and so things start to come out of the woodwork, and it becomes more of an awareness issue, like of raising awareness and saying, okay, this is not just for the social scientists, this can help all of us. And so I think it is, I think somebody also already has mentioned like the grassroots effort of bringing these issues up to the top as we find them, and making sure that they're heard. And as we do that, we start to get more attention around the matters. And I'm not saying I'm getting more buy-in necessarily, but definitely continuously raising awareness.
Got it. Yeah, so we have less than 10 minutes left actually. And so Gwen, I want to make sure that, we hit kind of the vision and plan for the workshop and how we want to approach that, and how folks from EPSCoR jurisdictions should be setting themselves up to engage that now. You want to hit that up?
Yeah, so a group of us got together and we wrote a workshop grant to EPSCoR to fund a workshop to basically gather as much of information through the capabilities model assessment tool as possible from as many EPSCoR jurisdictions as possible. And also, given the diversity of institutions and their how much they've invested in cyber infrastructure, where they are in the nation, all that really adds a lot of diversity to our results. So our plan now is to engage as many folks as we can, get folks to fill out the survey and contribute their results to the community data set. And then next spring in May, we will have a satellite workshop at the National EPSCoR conference. Now that was intentional to locate our conference, our workshop with the National EPSCoR conference, because that is a conference that all the EPSCoR PIs come to, NSF comes to, and others. So it's a great place to really not only gather to really discuss this information, but also to make the results known to folks at the EPSCoR conference. So our goal there is to, really at the hands-on part is to really discuss the results of the surveys, come up with some best practices, or at least some ideas about how we can all move forward, and also identify, and I think this is something that many of the funding agencies would be interested in, is figure out, are there areas for us to collaborate regionally and nationally to be able to support cyber infrastructure across our jurisdictions. So I think there's opportunities there as well. Also, most importantly, our workshop report will be shared widely with the EPSCoR jurisdictions as well as EPSCoR leadership at NSF. And also we are partnering with the Advisory Committee for Cyber Infrastructure. I rotated up that committee about a year ago, but we're also part of a working group with Deborah Dent from Jackson State in Mississippi to bring to that working group, which is an NSF working group, the results of our work with EPSCoR jurisdictions and more broadly with the capabilities model that Patrick and Dana and others have been leading. And then also bring in the results that Deborah has obtained from minority serving institutions to really come together with a pretty big statement that we want to make not only to EPSCoR, but also to NSF. And ultimately, the folks that really need to hear this message loud and clear, as I think we all know, are the lead administrators at our institutions. And still haven't quite figured out how to get those folks in a room or how to get this information to a place where they all gather, possibly APLU or something like that. But I think once we have a couple of good workshop reports and some real data to show, that's the point at which I think we can start to make some progress, or at least get the word out. And I really appreciate the other stories that folks have been telling about just how hard it is to get the conversation started. It is hard, but it's the right thing to do. And any way that we can help any of you out to make that happen, just let us know.
Yeah, thanks, Gwen. And it looks like we've got a bunch of more info in the chat here talking about medical data and data security, which is a very real issue that especially if we're talking about under-resourced medical colleges, we're going to be facing, and we're going to have to figure out how to deal with that. And it's going to, if it's not on your institutional leadership's radar already, it will be very shortly, I think. They probably, though, have some inkling if this is a real risk. So just a couple more minutes before we have to wrap it up. Any other questions or comments about our workshop, this topic, the data model, or just tell your story? Got some airtime available. Right, Mike mentions the CARC Emerging Centers group. So lots of commonalities between emerging center problems and the EPSCoR issues. And in fact, I think that the CARC Emerging Centers track is, their conversations also very much revolve around similar issues of how do we get from no or little RCD awareness to something that's viable or sustainable. There's kind of a critical mass, it seems, we need to be able to hit to sustain just a few basic research computing and data services on campuses that are kind of at that stage. And hitting that critical mass, at least for me, is, I feel like it's proving to be difficult to get past where I'm telling faculty members, this is an ad hoc service, and this is a production service you can count on 10 years from now. Two very different things. Jennifer suggests that CASC is hosting sessions on HIPAA data compliance issues. Yeah, so the bigger institutions are definitely paving the way here, and the practices of how to approach those problems are probably going to emerge in sessions like that. So,
well, and CASC, the EDGCAUSE Research Computing and Data Community Group, and CARC are working together on a strategy and policy facing track in the People Network to try to expose more people to all the good stuff that's going on in CASC and be able to share that more widely. So that's in bootstrapping right now, but you should expect to see a good deal more of that in the next year or two.
You know, one thought I had about thinking back to the CASC sets of things that folks are going to do. Has anyone? I'm just curious about this now with the capabilities model. Have we compared research expenditures in the different say NSF and NIH with the investment in cyber infrastructure across institutions as just kind of a Patrick?
Do you mean investment? Do you mean local investment compared to grants, or do you mean as a proportion of the grants that the funding agencies are providing?
I think what I would be interested in is for an institution looking at the grants that they win and their investment in cyber infrastructure.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, do you include all the investment they get from grants? Or are you looking for local discretionary budget investment?
No. What I'm looking for is a comparison between here's what, just listening to this conversation about HIPAA compliance and all that. If you don't have HIPAA compliance, do your investigators continue to write NIH grants or not? Just like, because I think that's something that VPs for research and presidents understand is the amount of research dollars coming in. What's the amount of cyber infrastructure investment?
I mean, I've only seen.
I'm certified here. Go right ahead.
Oh, so one this week is I watched Preston's at Purdue's talk last night. Now, granted, it's Purdue who's had a good run, but they had data going back to 1999, and he had some amazing charts in there. The other thing was there was a study eons ago with Amy Apon and I forget the rest of the group, who compared campuses research expenditures are compared to having a top 500 machine. So again, they're mostly looking at the higher end of the capabilities there. So it would be interesting to maybe, since we do have the schools, when they do the community data set, to go look up some data around research expenditures and see what that is. It's a lagging indicator though, so it does take time to show up.
We had a couple of requests to try to find out more about the budgets. It's not clear how many people would be willing to share that. There was some consternation about whether we should try to include that kind of budgetary information in.
We can get that from iPads, can't we?
Yeah.
We can get the grants, but I don't know if we can get campus investments.
Well, we can the campus investment, we could use the capabilities model data as a representative of that-ish, maybe?
We might. This is another area where we should probably talk again to the EPSCoR data survey folks, because they've done a good job in gathering more of that kind of leading trends and investment kind of data.
We're up on time. So I want to thank everyone who came today and just listened or contributed, particularly the BoF panelists, so Denise, Patrick, Dana, Gwen, those who really told their stories. So Anna, Jason, Dylan, Mike, probably forgetting some, but we really appreciate your engagement, and we hope that this has been informative and stimulating to think about for your own institutions. Looking forward to engaging, hopefully, many of you on the RCDCM, as well as the EPSCoR workshop that we're going to do next year. So thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.